a victim of domestic violence after refusing intimacy post-birth. The body of a Chinese international student was found 7 months after her disappearance, less than 1 kilometer from the place where she was once proposed to. Her name was Mengqi, 28 years old, once seen as the embodiment of the American study abroad dream for thousands of young Chinese girls. Smart, beautiful, married to a local man, and raising a child in a foreign land. But then, everything shattered. A marriage she once thought was paradise turned into a living hell. Behind the loving facade of her husband was a man obsessed with control, blinded by jealousy, and with twisted desires for intimacy. That night, she refused closeness because her body hadn't fully recovered after childbirth. He got angry. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. But could that alone truly push a man to such brutality? Let's reopen the entire case file together. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Born in 1991 in Xi'an, China, Mengqi was the only child of an intellectual family. From a young age, she stood out for her intelligence, diligence, and bright personality. After high school, she was admitted to East China University of Science and Technology, Shanghai, majoring in mechanical engineering, a demanding but promising field. With outstanding academic achievements, Mengqi earned a student exchange scholarship to study in the U.S., pursuing her master's at the University of Missouri, Columbia, a prestigious Ivy League-affiliated institution. She graduated in late 2014, at the age of 23, with a master's degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering. Originally planning to return to China, she ultimately decided to stay in Colombia and work for a local dental product manufacturing company. And it was there that fate led her to meet Joseph Elledge, a young American man. In 2016, Joseph Elledge, then 21, started an internship at the same company where Mengqi worked. He was a quiet American from a single-parent home, intelligent and seemingly sincere. Mengqi was Joseph's direct supervisor. Working together every day, their lunch breaks and simple chats quickly blossomed into romance. After a year of dating, Joseph flew to China to meet Mengqi's family. Their wedding was held on May 22, 2017, in a traditional Chinese ceremony. Afterwards, they returned to Colombia to settle down. In early 2018, Mengqi became pregnant. She decided to leave her job to rest during pregnancy, planning to return once the baby started preschool. In October 2018, their first daughter was born. Mengqi's parents flew from China to help her with childcare. It seemed like the next joyful chapter in their love story, but cracks began to show, starting during her postpartum confinement. At that time, Mengqi entered the confinement period, a traditional Chinese practice after childbirth. No cold air, no cold water, limited movement, no intimacy. Everything had to be strictly followed. To her, it was protection. To Joseph, it was absurd. He didn't understand. In America, women often do yoga, walk, or even resume intimacy just weeks after giving birth. He began to show irritation after being turned down. Fights simmered from what seemed like small cultural differences. When Mengqi's parents arrived from China, Joseph felt increasingly excluded. Everyone in the house spoke Chinese. He couldn't understand, wasn't involved, and felt left out of parenting decisions. Moreover, Joseph disagreed with how his mother-in-law cared for the baby. From bottle feeding to diapers, nap times to milk portions. Everything made him feel like his role as a father was being dismissed. Unable to return to full-time work, Mengqi took on small online translation gigs to cover daily expenses. Her parents occasionally sent her money from China. Meanwhile, Joseph had started a new internship at a large company far from the city. He rented a separate apartment near work, increasing expenses, reducing time at home, and drifting further from the family. Each visit back home brought more arguments. On the morning of October 10, 2019, Mengqi's mother, still in China, noticed something strange. Her daughter hadn't contacted her as usual. Messages went unanswered. Her phone was offline. Something felt off. Mengqi always called home at least once every day. Following her instincts, her mother immediately asked a friend living in Colombia to check on her daughter. When that friend arrived at the small 70-meter-squared apartment, she video called Mengqi's mother so she could see in real time. She knocked. Joseph Elledge answered the door, looking awkward and nervous. After a few questions, Joseph said, "She went out, she'll be back soon." But when pressed further, he admitted, "She's been missing for 2 days." Mengqi's mother panicked over the phone, demanding Joseph call the police immediately. But he hesitated. "It's okay, she just went out for something. Our baby still needs breastfeeding, she'll be back soon." It wasn't until 3:30 p.m. that Joseph went to the Columbia police station to report his wife missing. The victim, a 28-year-old Chinese woman, 165 centimeters tall, thin, with long hair. She left behind her phone and clothes. Police grew suspicious. The man showed no signs of worry about his missing wife. They noted in the report, "Unusually calm behavior warrants deeper investigation." In August 2019, just 2 months before her disappearance, Mengqi had called a friend to ask about divorce procedures and attorneys in Missouri. It was the first time she admitted, "I can't take it anymore." On the evening of October 8th, Mengqi video called her mother. Around 9:15 p.m., she messaged a friend about buying infant formula. Everything about her behavior appeared normal, no signs of stress or plans to run away. The last person to see Mengqi alive was Joseph Elledge. In his police statement, he said, "I gave her a back massage in the bedroom, tried to be intimate, but she declined. That's not unusual." After being rejected, Joseph claimed he played video games on the couch, then went to bed at 11:30 p.m., saying Mengqi was sound asleep. This detail was later disputed. At 5 a.m. the next morning, their baby cried. Joseph got up to soothe her, then went back to sleep. At 8 a.m., the baby cried again. Only then did he realize his wife wasn't in the house. He checked and found Mengqi's car still parked outside. Her phone, passport, wallet, and clothes were all untouched. She had only taken a small floral pattern purse. Joseph still didn't contact police. He said she probably just went out somewhere, and insisted she wouldn't leave for long since she was still breastfeeding. But in truth, Mengqi had gone missing the night before. Feeling stressed by family issues, Joseph drove his daughter to Jefferson City, about 50 kilometers from Columbia. They returned by 10:30 a.m. He claimed it was just a relaxing drive. But by 6:30 p.m., Joseph went out driving again, heading south, then east, then west, stopping by a forest trail in Columbia. His route was meandering and without clear purpose. Keep this travel detail in mind, it will become a crucial clue later. The next morning, a friend of Mengqi's mother came to knock on the apartment door. Joseph remained calm and unconcerned, but by that afternoon, seemingly pressured, he returned to the police station to file a missing person report. Columbia police officially launched an investigation. Mengqi's information was entered into the U.S. National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAM-US. Police also requested a court order to access her personal and financial data. A major challenge: the couple's apartment had no surveillance cameras, making it impossible to determine the exact time Mengqi left or whether she left the apartment alive. Police released public notices via media and social media, calling on the local community to provide any leads about the mysterious disappearance. Columbia's Chinese community, international friends, and University of Missouri students quickly mobilized. Volunteer teams, drones, forest search groups, and flyers were posted at gas stations, parks, and post offices. Mengqi's parents urgently applied for a visa to fly to the U.S., but as the investigation deepened, police increasingly ruled out the possibility that she left on her own. She loved her child dearly and was still breastfeeding. Meanwhile, Joseph's behavior raised more red flags. No panic, no searching, no questions about his wife's whereabouts. In the first 2 days after filing the report, he still met friends online to play games, as if nothing had happened. A close friend of Mengqi said, "On the 3rd day after she disappeared, Joseph logged into her social media account and messaged me, asking if I had heard from her. When asked if he needed help, Joseph remained silent. When questioned further, he began suggesting Mengqi might have been cheating, but provided no concrete evidence. This was a classic tactic, casting doubt on the victim, subtly shifting public suspicion, and deflecting attention from himself. Joseph's psychological profile began to unfold. A highly controlling person who forbade his wife from socializing, got upset if she visited friends or family. On October 15, 2019, exactly 1 week after Mengqi disappeared, her parents arrived in the US, clinging to hope that their daughter was still alive. That same afternoon, Joseph agreed to a televised interview with a local news channel. It was his first public appearance since Mengqi went missing. In the 9-minute interview, Joseph's demeanor shocked viewers. He smiled frequently, even laughed out loud while talking about his missing wife. When asked, "What do you love about Mengqi?" Joseph scoffed and raised his eyebrows, listing cold traits like a resume. "She's professional, works hard, detail-oriented, a bit difficult. She helps me make money." Not a single mention of love or affection. When asked why he delayed calling the police, Joseph replied, "I thought she was out seeing a friend. It's not unusual for her to leave without her phone." This explanation contradicted his earlier claim that she was home in the morning and he didn't know where she had gone. During the interview, Joseph also suggested Mengqi had been unfaithful. In the past few months, she had been secretly talking to another man. Yet just a few lines later, he added, "She's a wonderful mother. I hope she's still alive. I'll try to be a better husband." His words lacked consistency. One moment blaming, the next praising, then playing the victim. What troubled investigators most was what happened after the interview. Despite knowing his wife didn't take her phone, wallet, keys, or clothes, Joseph locked up the apartment and drove his 1-year-old daughter out of town twice. He didn't take his daughter to a typical park. Instead, he drove around remote towns, stopping and walking with the child into forest trails for hours. At one point, his GPS signal disappeared for nearly 8 hours, yet he gave no clear explanation about where he had gone. This behavior couldn't be explained by depression or panic. It seemed planned, deliberate. Investigators began to suspect, was this part of a body disposal process? To investigate further, police requested a home search. Nothing unusual was found, except for a pair of shoes caked in mud. On October 17, 2019, Colombia police officially escalated Mengqi's case from missing person to criminal investigation. A search warrant was issued. Joseph Elledge's apartment, laptop, phone, and GPS device were all seized. GPS tracking revealed that Joseph's route on October 9th didn't match his original statement. Beyond the places he mentioned, Joseph had driven from R-Sport to Bouve, then continued another 15 kilometers to Lammen, stopping near the Lam River for about 45 minutes. This area was isolated, with no surveillance cameras, and had terrain suitable for digging, burying, or concealing evidence. Data recovered from Joseph's phone and audio recorder revealed 12 recorded arguments between him and Mengqi. The recordings documented intense conflicts, verbal abuse, psychological pressure, and emotional violence. In some, Joseph's mother was also present. Police also seized 2 notebooks. One was a 51-page journal listing detailed reasons for hating his wife. The second notebook was a self-prepared interrogation manual, filled with notes like, "Avoid talking about the past, stay calm, don't mention conflict." By cross-checking with Mengqi's family, investigators obtained photos and videos she had sent to her mother and close friends before she disappeared. Some photos showed their infant daughter with signs of possible abuse, bruises and swelling on the face and shoulders. In previous chats, Mengqi had mentioned wanting to report Joseph to the police out of concern for her daughter's safety. But after Joseph begged for forgiveness and promised to stop hitting the child, she decided to give him another chance. With photos, videos, GPS data, audio recordings, and psychological journals in hand, police filed charges against Joseph Elledge for child abuse. This was just the first step to detain the suspect. But more importantly, it became a critical link in building a murder case that was tightening by the hour. On October 25, 2019, police executed the arrest warrant for Joseph Elledge on charges of child abuse. Upon arrival, they found Joseph and his mother packing luggage. Their explanation was they wanted to take the baby out to relax, but police saw it as an attempted escape. Joseph was taken into custody at the local jail with a bond set at $500,000. This unusually high bail for child abuse suggested that authorities wanted to keep him detained as the murder investigation progressed. A month after Mengqi's disappearance, police announced there was no evidence to suggest she was still alive. Based on all collected materials, the case was officially reclassified from missing person to homicide. Joseph was now the primary suspect, and investigators began reconstructing his movements before and after Mengqi vanished. Yet despite extensive searches, no trace of Mengqi's body was found. Although the body hadn't been recovered, the volume of circumstantial evidence led to formal charges on May 19, 2020. First-degree murder, child abuse, and third-degree domestic assault. Joseph continued to deny all charges, claiming that his wife had left home voluntarily and never returned. Meanwhile, police stated the evidence was overwhelming, even without a body, including signs of concealment, suspicious GPS behavior, threatening audio, and deliberate preparation of false statements. Public outrage erupted. Community groups and the media labeled this as a textbook case of cross-cultural marital violence, demanding justice for Mengqi. On May 15, 2020, nearly 18 months after Mengqi went missing, a hiker discovered human remains hidden beneath decaying leaves at Rockbridge State Park. Nearby, police found a floral-patterned purse that matched the one Mengqi was last seen carrying. Dental analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Mengqi, the woman whom her family, community, and police had been searching for over a year. After the body was found, Joseph Elledge changed his testimony. He claimed he had seen sensitive messages between his wife and another man before she disappeared. He said that on the night of October 8th, after being refused intimacy, they got into a heated argument. When Joseph tried to take their daughter outside, Mengqi resisted. During the struggle, she fell unconscious. Joseph continued. Panicked, he placed her on the sofa. Later, seeing her sleeping, he went to bed. The next morning, he touched her and realized her body was cold. He didn't call for help, didn't contact police. Instead, he put her body in the trunk and went looking for a remote place in the forest to bury her. On the morning of October 9, 2019, Joseph drove around Colombia with their daughter, trying to find a discreet place to bury Mengqi's body. But by afternoon, he still hadn't found a suitable location. The next day, when a friend of Mengqi's mother came looking for her, Joseph was forced to invent a story. My wife ran away. Right after that, Joseph took his daughter to Rockbridge State Park, about 8 kilometers from home, an area he knew well. In a forested corner with no cell signal, he spent nearly 40 minutes burying Mengqi's body. His mud-covered shoes later became key evidence in the trial. The burial site was less than 800 meters from where Joseph had once proposed to Mengqi, a cruel irony of love and death. On October 1, 2021, the official trial of Joseph Elledge began. The defense argued this was a tragic accident during a scuffle, and that Mengqi's death resulted from a brain hemorrhage. Joseph's failure to call for help, they claimed, was due to panic. But prosecutors refuted that, citing over 9 hours of audio in which Joseph frequently insulted, degraded, and blamed his wife and her family. He showed jealousy, manipulation, and obsessive control. The motive was clear: to avoid dividing assets, skip alimony, and prevent Mengqi from taking their daughter back to China. Prosecutors suspected that during the massage that night, Joseph may have fatally strangled his wife, leaving no blood evidence. Every detail pointed to a cold, calculated plan. On November 11, 2021, after days of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Joseph Elledge guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison. In December, the defense filed an appeal, arguing that evidence like the audio recordings, soil on his shoes, and interrogation transcripts were unfairly used. However, at the 2022 hearing, the judge declared, the defendant showed no remorse and avoided responsibility until the very end. The 28-year prison sentence was upheld. Joseph was officially imprisoned, but the grief of Mengqi's family could never be erased. Mengqi, a talented, kind, and ambitious young woman, was gone forever. She left behind a small child and a wound that may never heal. Her tragedy, we hope, will raise awareness about domestic violence and every woman's right to live. This video concludes here. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. On July 25, 2010, at the parking lot of Blackpool Victoria Hospital in England, a young nurse named Jane Clough was found collapsed in the staff parking area in critical condition. Her body had multiple severe wounds, and despite being rushed to emergency care, she could not survive. The perpetrator was none other than her ex-boyfriend, Jonathan Vass, the man she had previously reported for serious offenses, including violence and physical coercion. He had stalked her, carefully planned the attack, and murdered Jane just before her night shift began. What shocked the whole of the UK was that the killer had been released on bail just a few months earlier, despite facing serious charges. How could a dangerous man like Vass be allowed to walk freely among the public? Who is responsible for the death of this young nurse? Like and subscribe to follow the shocking developments of this case. Our main character, Jane Clough, was born in 1984 in the town of Nelson, in Lancashire, England. She grew up in an intellectual family, raised with love and inspired early on by her mother to pursue a career in medicine. From a young age, she showed a kind, strong-willed personality and a desire to help others. After graduating with a degree in nursing, Jane began working in the emergency department of Blackpool Victoria Hospital in 2007. According to several colleagues, Jane Clough was well liked for her dedication and consistently positive attitude. During her time at the hospital, she met and developed feelings for Jonathan Vass, an emergency medical technician. At first, Jonathan seemed quiet, thoughtful, and a good listener, the kind of person who made Jane feel safe and understood. Their relationship blossomed during shared shifts. To avoid gossip about dating a coworker, they decided to keep it secret. But the sweet moments they shared made Jane believe she had found her destiny. After a few months of secretly dating, Jane could no longer hide her happiness and began sharing her relationship with close colleagues. But their reaction left her shocked. In the eyes of many, Jonathan was not as perfect as she thought. He was lazy, made inappropriate jokes, and had even shown disrespectful behavior toward female colleagues. Jane was taken aback, as in their private world, Jonathan always appeared kind and patient. She believed he might simply not get along with others, but with her, he was truly caring and empathetic. She dismissed all doubts and chose to trust her feelings. Then one evening, after they made their relationship public, Jonathan confessed that he was married and had 2 young children. This truth devastated Jane and left her heartbroken. However, Jonathan claimed that because of his love for Jane, he wanted to start over. At that moment, Jane softened and believed he was sincere, giving him another chance. A few months later, Jonathan said he had finalized his divorce and suggested they move in together. Jane agreed. She believed it would be a new chapter of happiness after all they had been through. After moving into a small house in Lancashire, bought by Jane's parents for her in 2008, the happy days she had hoped for never came. Jonathan quickly revealed his true nature. He had never divorced as he claimed. His legal wife, Joanne, was still living with their 2 young children. He regularly returned home to his wife, using the excuse of visiting the children. Meanwhile, Jane, who had placed all her trust in him, was merely a victim in a well-orchestrated lie. It didn't stop there. He was also involved with another woman named Yvonne, who lived in Blackpool. He often used night shifts at the hospital as an excuse to deceive both his wife and girlfriend. With 3 women, Jonathan lived 3 different lives, and all 3 were deceived. Jane's parents, John and Penny, initially had a good impression of Jonathan. His caring attitude, attention to detail, and polite behavior toward Jane made them believe their daughter had found a good man. However, that trust gradually turned into suspicion when Jane's parents noticed Jonathan showing inconsistent behaviors, such as he lied about unnecessary things, like boasting about a wealthy grandmother who left him an inheritance, when in fact he was in debt and living paycheck to paycheck. He even spoke badly about Jane to his colleagues, describing her as annoying and controlling, while he was the one who was truly controlling. The control began subtly. He showed jealousy without reason and constantly questioned Jane about her schedule, the people she met, and where she went. He read her messages, checked her calls, and even secretly searched through her purse and wallet. More worryingly, in some cases, Jonathan confined Jane in the house and took her phone, leaving her unable to contact anyone. And then, the worst began. Jonathan became violent. It started with outbursts of rage and escalated into severe physical assaults. Once, he shoved Jane so hard she suffered a head injury. Jane began to withdraw, living in constant fear. Because she loved Jonathan so much, she chose to stay silent, telling no one and not reporting to the police. Worse still, Jane began to blame herself, believing that she was the reason for Jonathan's outbursts. But all of that was nothing compared to the nightmare that was about to unfold. In January 2009, Jane discovered she was pregnant. She didn't know whether to feel happy or sad. Deep down, she hoped the baby would be the key to saving their crumbling relationship, that becoming a father would change Jonathan and the child would bring light to his darkness. But that hope was cruelly betrayed. In July 2009, when she was 7 months pregnant, Jane experienced one of the worst moments of her life. That day, feeling exhausted, she refused intimacy. However, Jonathan not only ignored her wishes but used force to get his way. The incident left her not only physically hurt, but also deeply traumatized. From that day on, the coercion continued regularly. Jane endured it even during the postpartum period, a time when she should have been resting and recovering. The baby was born in October, but for Jane, the nightmare was far from over. At that moment, Jane understood. This wasn't love, it was hell. If she didn't escape, the next person to be destroyed could be her, or her baby. One morning, after waiting for Jonathan to leave the house, Jane hurriedly packed a few clothes, grabbed her baby, and fled from the house of horror. She returned to her parents' home, bruised and mentally exhausted. Hearing everything Jane had been through, John and Penny Clough hugged their daughter tightly and cried. It was the first moment in months that Jane felt safe. She believed that from now on, it would be just her and her daughter. No more Jonathan, the man who deceived and abused her. But Jane was kind-hearted and easily swayed. Even after leaving, she secretly hoped he might change. Sensing this weakness, Jonathan reached out again. He texted, called, begged to come back, promised to change, and even vowed to attend therapy. Faced with his desperate pleas, Jane's soft heart wavered once again. She agreed to return, on the condition that Jonathan would undergo serious psychological treatment. But just days after Jane came back, the violence resumed, this time even more brutal than before. After that beating, Jane no longer hesitated. She left the house once again and returned to her parents' home. A few weeks later, she went to the police station and officially filed charges, providing evidence, photos of her injuries, written records, and detailed statements. Jonathan was immediately arrested and charged with serious offenses, including domestic violence and severe assault. In court, he denied everything, claiming Jane had fabricated the story to seek attention. But this time, Jane was no longer the weak woman waiting for change. She was a victim standing up to her abuser. In November 2009, after a long investigation, Jonathan Vass was officially indicted on multiple serious charges, including coercion, violence, and psychological control. He was held in custody awaiting trial, scheduled for the following October. Under UK law at the time, defendants in criminal cases, even for serious crimes like rape, could apply for bail up to 3 times, as long as they hadn't been convicted. In Jonathan Vass's case, his first and second bail applications were denied, largely thanks to Jane's injury records and detailed testimony. During this time, Jane began journaling again, working part-time, playing with her daughter, and hoping that, as long as he is convicted, everything will end. However, no one expected that on the third application, just a few months before the trial, the court approved Jonathan's bail. The ruling clearly stated, "There is no specific evidence showing the defendant poses a direct threat to the complainant." The judge did not summon Jane for an updated testimony. The police failed to provide further documents. Jane's family wasn't informed until after the decision had been made. At the time of his release, Jonathan was still facing 9 serious charges, including coercion, control, and physical and emotional abuse toward Jane. The moment Jonathan walked free, Jane's family was devastated. In the days that followed, Jane lived in constant fear, afraid to go out, afraid to stay home alone, even haunted by the sound of a car stopping outside. She kept her doors locked at all times, changed her phone number, avoided going out alone, and no longer dared to take her baby to the park. Her journal was now filled with fear. January 2010, I fear he will find me. I don't believe he'll just sit and wait. March 2010, if convicted, he will kill me. I'm certain of it. People around Jane took turns escorting her to the hospital. The parking lot was only 200 meters away from the building, but everyone knew one vulnerable moment could lead to tragedy. She masked her fear by staying busy, playing with her child, attending church, trying to live normally. Everyone believed that once the trial came, it would all be over. But the tragedy came, cruelly, and much sooner than anyone expected. On July 23, 2010, for the first time in a long while, Jane agreed to go out with her close friends. She laughed, danced, and radiated as if the dark days had never existed. Everyone believed that Jane, the optimistic, positive girl, was finally coming back. On the evening of Sunday, July 25th, around 8 p.m., Jane drove to her night shift at Blackpool Victoria Hospital. Usually, a friend or family member accompanied her from the parking lot to the hospital, but that day she said, "No need, it's just 200 meters." At 8:20 p.m. that same night, Jane had just stepped out of her car, not yet locking the door. Out of the darkness, Jonathan Vass suddenly charged, seemingly having waited there. In his hand was a sharp object. He attacked her repeatedly. She had no time to react. Everything happened within seconds. Right in the staff parking lot, just steps away from the emergency department. Jane collapsed. Under the cold yellow lights, her body lay motionless. But she was still breathing. Jonathan turned and walked away, then suddenly stopped. He saw Jane still trying to move, her eyes filled with fear, her hand clinging to life. Without hesitation, he returned and delivered a fatal blow, ending Jane's life. As he left, the area fell into a chilling silence. Just minutes later, hospital staff discovered Jane in critical condition. Some tried to resuscitate her, in horror and desperation, but it was too late. 4 hours later, the police knocked on John and Penny Clough's door. As the door opened, they hesitantly delivered the devastating news: Jane Clough had passed away. Penny collapsed in grief, while John was frozen in shock, unable to believe the tragedy that had struck their family. At the gruesome crime scene, forensic experts confirmed the severity of the injuries. Over 70 stab wounds, many concentrated in vulnerable areas, indicating an especially brutal attack. Due to the gravity of the case and Jane's previous warnings about her ex-boyfriend, suspicion quickly turned to Jonathan Vass. Jane's family and friends immediately contacted the police, fearing that if Jonathan was the killer, he might target Jane's parents and her 9-month-old daughter next. Recognizing the threat, authorities set up 24/7 surveillance at John and Penny Clough's residence. And just as feared, at 7:30 a.m. on Monday, July 26, 2010, Jonathan appeared near the victim's home. He parked nearby and walked toward the trunk of his car, as if retrieving something. When the trunk opened, investigators were horrified. Inside was a full can of gasoline. Jonathan was arrested on the spot, offering no resistance. The subsequent investigation confirmed he intended to set fire to the house where John, Penny, and the 9-month-old, his own child with Jane, were living. Had he not been stopped, the tragedy could have exceeded all imagination. In October 2011, at the Preston Crown Court trial, Jonathan Vass was convicted of first-degree murder. The sentence, life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for at least 30 years. When the verdict was announced, Jonathan Vass lowered his head, covered his face with his hands, and cried, as if those tears could wash away the crimes he had committed. But nothing could ease the pain he left behind. Some believed he was remorseful, but behavioral experts stated, "That's not remorse, that's the tears of a man who just lost control, like a bitter soul, no longer able to do what he wants." After the trial, John and Penny Clough were not only devastated, but furious. They were angry because if the third bail application hadn't been approved, Jane might still be alive. They couldn't accept that someone charged with serious offenses was granted bail, while their daughter lived each day in fear. And from there, they began a journey. Not out of hatred, but for justice. For 2 years, they met with members of parliament, lobbied, and shared Jane's story in the media. They fought to change a loophole in the legal system, so victims like their daughter would be truly protected. In 2012, the UK Parliament passed Jane's Law. A new law was enacted, granting victims of abuse or their legal representatives the right to formally oppose a defendant's bail. Their input must be considered by the court before any decision is made. A small change, but one paid for with irreplaceable loss. And thanks to it, many lives have since been protected. Jane Clough, a dedicated nurse, a gentle mother, a resilient woman, died at the age of 26, leaving behind countless unfulfilled dreams. Before her death, she was planning to return to university to pursue her dream of becoming a doctor. She never got the chance to fulfill that dream. But through her story, Jane has saved the lives of other women. And perhaps that is a mission even greater than medicine. This video concludes here. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Help me. An intruder has killed my wife. He is still in the house. I am tied up. Please, please come immediately. The emergency call to the police station shattered the quiet atmosphere in Ellington, Connecticut. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Richard Dabate tied to a chair in the living room. In the basement, Connie Dabate's lifeless body lay motionless on the cold floor, riddled with bullet wounds. They assumed the perpetrator had fled the house, but as the police began their investigation, one truth became clear. He had never left. It was Richard himself who ruthlessly murdered his wife and staged the crime scene. The details of the case left even the most experienced investigators baffled. What was the cause of it all? How did the police catch him? A series of thrilling revelations await. Before we begin, like and subscribe to the channel to avoid missing future crime cases. Case setting: the town of Ellington, Connecticut. At 8:59 a.m. on December 23, 2015, the 911 dispatch center received an urgent call from Richard Dabate. His voice was trembling, breathing heavily as if he had just survived a life-or-death struggle. "Please, a burglar broke in. He shot my wife. I am tied up. He ran away. Come immediately." Less than 10 minutes later, the Ellington police team arrived at the scene. They pushed the door open and immediately noticed a strange sight. Richard Dabate was lying on the living room floor, tied to a folding chair with zip ties, his clothes disheveled, and minor scratches on his body. In the basement, a horrifying truth awaited them. His wife, Connie Dabate, lay on the floor, motionless, blood staining the cold tile floor. She had died. But there was no sign of the perpetrator. It seemed he had fled. The police immediately untied Richard and began their investigation. After an initial display of panic, Richard calmed down and recounted. On the morning of December 23, 2015, he left home around 8:40 a.m. after his 2 sons had gone to school. While driving, he suddenly remembered that he had forgotten his laptop. He quickly sent an email from his phone, informing his boss that he would be late, then turned the car around to return home. Richard arrived home around 8:45 to 9 a.m. As soon as he entered, he heard a strange noise from the second floor. A sense of unease crept in, but he did not stop. He climbed the stairs toward the bedroom. The bedroom door was wide open. Inside, a masked man dressed in camouflage was rummaging through Connie's jewelry box. Without any sign of panic, the stranger turned to look at Richard. He was unarmed but demanded Richard hand over cash, credit cards, and PIN codes. Richard claimed he complied without hesitation, fearing the intruder might act violently. After receiving what he wanted, the burglar continued searching the bedroom. An eerie silence enveloped the house until the garage door suddenly opened. Connie had returned early from her fitness class at the Indian Valley YMCA. The sound of her shoes echoed on the wooden floor. Inside, the atmosphere turned tense. As she stepped through the kitchen door, before she could understand what was happening, Richard shouted for her to run. But instead of fleeing the house, she ran downstairs to the basement. The masked man immediately chased after Connie. Richard could not see what was happening, but 2 deafening gunshots rang out from the basement. When he ran down, Connie was already on the floor with multiple gunshot wounds. There was no time to think. The intruder returned to the ground floor, found a utility knife, and attacked Richard's leg before tying him to a chair with zip ties. Not stopping there, the intruder even brought out a blowtorch, seemingly intending to torture Richard before fleeing. Richard claimed he struggled violently, trying to fight back, injuring the intruder. Eventually, the man panicked, abandoned the blowtorch, and fled the scene. Police noted the wounds on Richard's leg, but they were all superficial, not life-threatening. The cuts were shallow, not deep enough to cause severe blood loss, and there were no signs of a fierce struggle. However, from his very first statement, police found his testimony suspicious. Throughout Connie's entire attack, he seemingly did nothing. The police immediately deployed K9 units to track the intruder's scent. But instead of leading them toward an escape route, the dogs lingered around Richard, even jumping onto the ambulance where he was being treated. 2 other K9 units also failed to trace any unknown person. Could an intruder really vanish without leaving any trace? Not even a scent? A Ruger .357 Magnum revolver, a weapon Richard had purchased just 2 months prior, was found next to Connie's body. It was the murder weapon. However, there were no fingerprints on the gun. The house showed no signs of forced entry. All valuables remained untouched. Richard claimed he had fought the intruder, but when police checked the closet where the supposed struggle had occurred, everything remained tidy. The drawers were still shut, with no signs of being rummaged through. He said the burglar had been searching through the jewelry box before being discovered. Yet, all the jewelry remained neatly inside the drawers. If there had truly been a thief, why didn't he take anything? At the very least, if he had been truly rummaging for valuables and unexpectedly encountered Richard, the room should have been in disarray. Richard had no bruises, despite claiming he had wrestled with the intruder before being tied up. The police began considering another possibility. Could Richard have tied himself up to stage the crime scene? They examined Connie's body. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. She had 2 gunshot wounds, one in the abdomen and one in the head, with no sign of resistance. This only happens when the victim doesn't realize the threat or trusts the killer. In the police department's briefing room, investigators pinned all the case details onto a board. A brutal murder, an unidentified suspect, and a husband who miraculously survived. But the strange thing was, there was no evidence of the perpetrator's existence apart from Richard's testimony. The first hypothesis, this could have been a real burglary, but the killer was someone familiar. If the intruder had been a complete stranger, he would have left traces, shoe prints, fingerprints, or DNA. But the house was spotless, as if the killer knew everything and had time to erase any traces. The second hypothesis, Richard might have staged everything himself. The lack of a struggle, his minor injuries, and the fact that all the weapons came from inside the house raised questions. Was this a premeditated murder? But both theories had problems. If it was a break-in, why didn't the intruder steal anything? If it was a planned murder, could Richard have tied himself up? How could he stage the scene without leaving any flaws? The police needed stronger evidence, objective data that would reveal the truth. Investigators expanded their probe, focusing on Richard Dabate's past and relationships. They examined his phone, browsing history, emails, and financial records. What they found completely changed the direction of the case. The first piece of evidence came from Richard's phone records. Investigators discovered that he frequently sent messages and made calls at odd hours, not to his wife, but to a mysterious woman. The messages were affectionate, the calls lasted for hours, and most importantly, there were messages about a child. The woman was identified as an old high school friend of Richard. She had been divorced and started an affair with him in 2014, a year before the murder. They had carried on a secret relationship all that time. When interrogated, the woman initially denied the affair. But when the police presented the text messages, she was forced to admit it. She was pregnant with Richard's child. The baby was due just months after Connie was murdered. Richard had been living a double life for over a year. In public, he was a devoted husband and father. But behind closed doors, he had another relationship, another family in the making. The problem was, Connie had no idea. Police examined Richard's bank accounts. They discovered suspicious transactions, hotel bills, expensive gifts, and large sums of money transferred to his mistress. Richard initially denied all accusations, but when faced with undeniable evidence, he gave a shocking explanation. He claimed that Connie knew about the affair. According to him, they had wanted another child, but couldn't conceive, so they had agreed for his mistress to carry the baby, and all three of them would raise it together. But this statement quickly collapsed. His mistress told police that Connie had never known. The child was not the result of a mutual agreement. It was the result of pure betrayal. Police found a series of messages Richard sent to his mistress before Connie was killed. In them, he promised to leave his wife, start a new life with his mistress, and that everything would be taken care of soon. For now, Richard Dabate was the prime suspect due to his deceitful testimony, but police needed irrefutable proof. This led them to focus on technology, because a liar can alter their words, but digital data does not lie. Connie's phone became the first key. It was found under her coat at the scene, its screen locked, but police quickly retrieved its data. They discovered a note written in December 2014, a year before the murder, titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." In the note, Connie listed numerous reasons for wanting to end her marriage with Richard: reckless spending, withdrawing money from accounts that weren't his, being an irresponsible father, constant lying, and even behaving like a child. Notably, while the note did include a few positive traits about Richard, the negative list was much longer. Connie had been considering divorce for a long time. Text messages from Connie's phone also revealed their final argument. One day before the murder, Connie confronted Richard about a hidden cable bill. The text history showed an intense argument, with Connie expressing her frustration over his dishonesty. This perfectly matched the phone records police had collected from Richard's device. Additionally, Richard's home security system provided another crucial piece of evidence. That morning, records showed that Richard had turned the alarm system on and off multiple times, something highly unusual compared to other days. Police dug into Richard's tablet. He had claimed to have left home between 8:30 and 8:40 a.m., but his browsing history told a completely different story. At 8:26 and 8:27 a.m., Richard was browsing Facebook, during the exact time he claimed he was driving to work. At 8:37 a.m., he Googled long-lasting tattoo ideas. Would a man who just lost his wife in a brutal murder be interested in getting a tattoo? At 8:41 a.m., he logged into his Outlook email account from the home IP address. But according to his testimony, he was already miles away by then. How could he log in if he wasn't there? A blatant contradiction. The peak of his lies. At 9:04 a.m., an email was sent from Richard's account to his supervisor. In it, he claimed he was in his car about 3 kilometers away from home. But Microsoft data confirmed that this email was sent from the Dabate home's IP address. He never left the house. Police examined Connie's Fitbit. This health tracking device provided undeniable evidence of her final movements that morning. At 8:46 a.m., the Fitbit recorded Connie leaving home for her fitness class at YMCA. Surveillance cameras confirmed she arrived at the YMCA parking lot at 8:53 a.m. But she left at 9:08 a.m. because the class was canceled. At 8:58 a.m., Connie sent a private message via Facebook Messenger to schedule an appointment with her therapist. At 9:23 a.m., Fitbit data recorded Connie returning home, matching the home alarm system's record when the garage-to-kitchen door was opened. This was the moment she stepped into her fateful house. Between 9:40 to 9:46 a.m., Connie used her phone to upload 2 videos to Facebook and texted a friend via Messenger. The IP address confirmed all these activities happened from the Dabate home. But the most shocking detail was here. Richard claimed Connie was killed as soon as she entered the house, around 9:20 a.m. But Fitbit data showed that Connie was still moving inside the house until 10:05 a.m. An hour after Richard claimed she was dead, she was still walking around the house. An unexplainable contradiction. A killer can change their story, but digital data never lies. Fitbit revealed another surprising detail. Between 9:30 to 10:05 a.m., Connie walked 370 meters. Yet, Richard claimed she ran straight to the basement when she entered the house. The distance from the entrance to the basement was only 38 meters. So, where did Connie go? The full picture of the case was becoming clear. Connie returned home, carried out her usual activities, uploaded videos, texted friends, and moved around the house. Only after 10:05 a.m. did the Fitbit data stop, the moment she was actually murdered. The story of an intruder no longer held any weight. There was no break-in, no sudden attack. There was only one person in the house with Connie at that time, Richard. All evidence pointed directly at him. Digital data shattered Richard's lies, exposing his cruel murder plan. Now, the police were ready for the final interrogation. On December 27, 2015, Richard Dabate entered the interrogation room at the Ellington police station. He no longer looked confident. He appeared exhausted, but still tried to maintain his composure. The police let Richard recount the entire morning's events himself. He repeated the story of the masked intruder, the struggle, being tied up, and Connie's death. Every word flowed smoothly, as if he had rehearsed it hundreds of times. The investigators did not interrupt. They simply listened, nodded, and occasionally jotted down brief notes. There were no immediate objections, no accusations. The prolonged silence made Richard gradually lose control of the conversation. A thick file was placed on the table. Inside was all the digital evidence: tablet records, phone history, Connie's Fitbit data, and surveillance footage. The evidence was arranged in a flawless timeline. First, police pointed out the time Richard claimed he left home. But in reality, he was still there. His browser history showed he was on Facebook at 8:26 a.m., searching for tattoos at 8:37 a.m., and sending emails from his home IP at 9:04 a.m. Then came Connie's Fitbit data, the home alarm records, and the Dabate home's IP address logs. Everything contradicted his claims. Richard lowered his head, his trembling hand clenched on the table. No escape, no way to hide from the truth. But he still denied everything. In reality, with everything police had gathered, his motive was crystal clear. Richard did not want a divorce. He feared losing his assets, feared being abandoned by his wife, and feared responsibility. A divorce would cost him everything. Murder, in his mind, was the perfect solution. Richard Dabate was born on April 11, 1976 in Connecticut, USA. He grew up in a middle-class, well-educated family. He attended a local university and quickly landed a job in the IT industry. Richard had a stable career, a beautiful house, and a seemingly perfect life. However, behind this facade, he always had ambitions beyond his means. In 2003, Richard married Connie Dabate. They had 2 sons and lived in a large house in Ellington, Connecticut. Friends and neighbors saw them as the ideal family, but in reality, their marriage was far from happy. Tensions began to rise when Richard started spending recklessly, borrowing money from family accounts without telling his wife. Connie kept track of missing funds and grew frustrated with Richard's lack of responsibility towards their children. He was frequently absent, leaving Connie to handle everything alone. In 2014, Richard began an affair with a high school friend. She had recently divorced, and Richard quickly entered her life with sweet promises. The affair lasted for over a year. He not only spent time with his mistress, but also spent money on gifts, vacations, and luxurious hotel stays. By 2015, his mistress informed him that she was pregnant. This marked a turning point in Richard's mindset. In November 2015, Richard began planning his wife's murder. He researched how to stage a crime scene, how to tie himself up alone, studied past burglary cases, and explored ways to commit murder without being caught. He purchased a Ruger 357 Magnum revolver just 2 months before the crime. On the morning of December 23, 2015, Richard executed his plan. He pretended to leave for work, but stayed home instead. According to Fitbit data, Connie was still moving around the house until 10:05 a.m. It was during this time that Richard murdered his wife. After killing her, he inflicted minor injuries on his leg with a box cutter. He then tied himself to a chair with zip ties and called 911 to report a fake burglary. A flawless plan, but he never expected that technology would betray him. In April 2017, after more than a year of investigation, police officially arrested Richard Dabate. He was charged with first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and false testimony. The investigation had gathered hundreds of pieces of evidence against him, yet he continued to plead innocence. Richard Dabate's trial began on April 5, 2022, lasting 22 consecutive days. It became one of the most shocking cases in Connecticut's history. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming amount of evidence, over 600 pieces, including Fitbit data, browsing history, alarm system records, phone data, and testimony from 130 witnesses to expose Richard's crime. Richard's defense attorneys attempted to turn the case around, arguing that digital data could be flawed and that Richard simply misremembered the timeline. But these arguments failed to explain one undeniable fact: there was no sign of an intruder. The most shocking moment came when the jury was shown a text message Richard had sent to his mistress just 1 day before Connie was murdered. He had written, "I'll see you tomorrow, my love." Tomorrow, the day his wife was killed. After 22 days of debate, on May 10, 2022, the jury reached a verdict. After just 7 hours of deliberation, they unanimously convicted Richard Dabate on all charges. He was found guilty of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and perjury. The judge sentenced Richard Dabate to 65 years in prison. No chance of parole, no early release. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The media widely covered the case, calling it America's first Fitbit murder case. Never before had health tracking data played such a decisive role in a murder trial. Technology had spoken for the victim, exposing the killer. Richard has continued to appeal. The most recent attempt was in October 2024, when he filed for a case review, but every effort has failed. There was no loophole that could set him free. Richard Dabate's case serves as a chilling reminder of technology's power in solving crimes. And it stands as undeniable proof that no matter how carefully a crime is concealed, the truth will always come to light. This video concludes here. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can bring you more strange and emotional cases. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.